Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a SIXER video session with on their new topic for this month. That's on DisruptHR. And with this session, we've got four amazing panelists joining us today to talk through a very interesting topic, especially during COVID times, and that's to do with the implications of digital transformation in people management, really going into an insight to recruitment, training, and talent management. I'm your host for today, Minuri Adar Surya. I'm head of programs here at Hatch, and we're very excited to be partnering with SIXER Video to bring this session over to you today. If you're wondering what a head of programs is doing hosting this session, my background is actually in HR. So I spent about 15 years in human resources, working for a number of companies, both overseas and here in Sri Lanka, working on a number of HRIS global implementations and other programs across diversity and inclusion, health and well-being, strategic workforce planning, just to name a few. And joining me today, like I said, an amazing set of panelists here today, starting with Peter de Almeida. Hi, Peter. Great to have you on the show. Peter is CEO. Hi, Peter. Peter is the CEO and Managing Director of Enable, with a career that spans over nearly 3 decades, Peter, both locally and internationally. And he was also the CEO of Millennium ESP. And alongside his IT career, he has a great history of being involved with the labor rights movement of Sri Lanka, especially in the 1980s. And he's also a very well-known thespian here in Sri Lanka. Joining Peter and I today is also Chiranthi Kure, who is the Chief Transformation Officer at Hatton National Bank, or HNB, as we all fondly refer to it. She's a senior leader with a proven track record in digital transformation, business strategy, people leadership, and change management. We also have Zara Nalir, who's a community manager at GapStars. Hi, Zara. How are you? How's it going?
Hey, Minuri.
Hey. And her mission is really to create long-lasting connections to bridge between gap stars and the talented folks who become the new stars in their galaxy. So she's very passionate about everything human resources and creating amazing communities. We also have us joining from all the way from India while on a break is Gaurav Dasoria, who is the Group Director for Business Strategy and Digital Transformation at Valuable One PLC. He's very much a seasoned C-level executive with a proven track record of improving the top and bottom line of organization by developing innovative businesses, optimizing performance, and introducing digital technologies. And really, thanks. Hi, Gaurav, and thanks to everyone attending the session today. So we'll be having a very interesting discussion on the topic of, disrupting HR. What are the implications of digital transformation, especially from a people management or HR perspective? And all these panelists come from a very different, varying, contrasting views when it comes to approaching human resources. And that's the beauty of today's conversation. And that's what I'm super excited about. So if you do have any conversations as we go, we'd like to reserve it. I'll do a call out when you can ask the questions, but feel free to also use the Q&A panel or the direct messaging panel on the Zoom interface we have today to ask any questions you have, either for everyone on the panel or for individuals. We're more than happy to hear from you. So let's get things started, starting with Peter. So I really like to check in with you, Peter, especially during, COVID-19 and its impact, something that we've all come across is a number of Gen Zs in organizations, especially some of the tech-heavy organizations in Sri Lanka. Majority of them are either millennial or Gen Zs. Do you think that, it's been difficult to manage, especially COVID-19, and in terms of people management with these different groups? Or do you feel that it's more or less the same? And again, from your own experiences, what has that been like, especially trying to use tech to connect all these generations together during this period of time?
Okay, so firstly, a quick correction. I left Enable a year or so ago, actually 2 years ago. But I'm deeply engaged with companies, in fact, on this very subject of post-COVID engagement. It's not a technology issue, Minuri. It's a question of people, really. People have gone through so much difficulty, and and that covers everyone. It's not a Gen Z or a millennial issue. Considering what they've gone through, particularly those with young children, have really suffered because this online education has been a big problem because of devices and managing their time, and the children are not, can't do it on their own. They're not used to this, so there's a huge disruption of people's lives. And obviously, as a result, their mental well-being. Now, my question that we have to ask all of us honestly, how much effort have we put in as organizations to understand and to have conversations with our employees on this? Probably very little, probably very little. I don't think we have engaged. On the other hand, we were very quick to dismiss people out of their jobs. Even before you could figure out what's going on, 5 large companies were interviewed soon after. And 4 of them, these are large conglomerates, so-called the engine of growth of the economy. 4 of them, when they asked them, what is the one thing that you'd want the government to do? I was shocked. They said, we want relaxation of labor laws. What does that mean? It means throw them out of their jobs or cut their salaries. Now, is that the first thing that comes to your mind when you're facing a global pandemic and everyone is equally hurt and struggling and finding a way, uncertain future, and they're falling ill? So how heartless or ruthless must you be to consider that as your first option? And a lot of the companies that rushed to do this subsequently found that they were making huge profits, super profits, including apparel manufacturing company. Now, I'm talking to a company recently to give a talk next week. They said they've got a huge increase in order, and now back to the same problem, their employees are being overworked. So engagement is the key issue, isn't it? How do we get our staff engaged without understanding from them what they're going through, what are they feeling, what are they going through? Is your profitability the only criteria you want to consider? So I think we may have fallen short. Lots of companies. There are some companies who have done it very well, but I think by and large, most companies may have paid lip service. The plantation companies, for example, when their employees go on self-quarantine, which is a requirement, a medical requirement, their salary is docked. They don't get money for 2 weeks. So what do? They don't want to stay in quarantine. They want to come back to work, and then they're spreading the disease. You see, so I think we have a more fundamental problem of really not caring for our people. Although in our annual reports we call them our greatest asset, I don't think any sensible organization would treat their greatest asset in the kind of way a large company rush to do.
Yeah, a very interesting perspective, Peter. I think, no matter how much I think digital tools or transformation I think you have in an organization, if that level of values and care is not really there, you really suffer to engage regardless of generation, I think. And I really agree with you on that point, because I think we tend to sometimes just compartmentalize because a great study says so, or that's the newest buzzword to kind of go. But people's needs, when you really look at it, are almost the same. It's just that, they're at a different stage in their lives. And I think just recognizing that, acknowledging that is true. Do you think, especially with COVID, Peter, in terms of creating that connection, which I think people lacked a lot, especially some of the younger Gen Zers. Okay, let me not use that word, right? Some of the more, I guess, the graduates, for example, or people who are newer to the workforce. Do you think it created that disconnect, like on top of like these mass restructures that were happening out there?
I'm pretty sure it must have, although I don't have the data, the actual data to, but I'm sure, because you see they're young. They're not sure of their jobs. They're just finding their feet in the organization, finding their way. I mean, insecurity is one of the things that young people need some sense of security, right? That we are good for a few, and they hold us together. The company will hold us together. If you come to work every day without knowing, are you on the list of people who's going to be thrown out? How can you come and work? I mean, but we'll talk about the old Gen Z and others maybe later. I think you had a question from me about, what is it that will, that's common between all of these people in terms of a company's culture. Maybe we can talk about that subsequently, Minuri. If you can make a note of that, we can come to
absolutely
that. Creating a culture of keeping people engaged.
Yeah, and in that same light, Zara, really this question is for you. There's talk of this great resignation that is happening across the board. I mean, is this the new reality, or are we too focused on the buzzwords? Based on your own experience in your organization, your insights into the industry, what do you think is happening right now? Is it going back to Peter's point of that organizations not just showing care, or are there too many options out there? What do you think?
Interesting question, Minuri. And while Peter was actually speaking, I was very invested in what he was saying, because I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, when you really look at a lot of organizations, not just in Sri Lanka, but worldwide, it's a very, very true point about the lip service, because it's very easy to kind of portray yourself as an organization that cares for its people. It's very easy to, to put a couple of fancy words together to say, hey, we care about our people. We are a people first culture. It's easy to say that, but actually taking those things and putting it into action is a whole different ballgame altogether. Because it's not just HR. I feel like it's an entire organizational kind of process. And it's not something that you can create a policy or a procedure over. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that a lot of organizations go by this very by the book kind of approach to leadership and management. It's where we've kind of been told, okay, these are the procedures in place. These are the policies in place. If you put these into effect, you'll have a productive workforce. To an extent, you can agree on that in a normal world, but the world is constantly changing, and whether it's COVID or whether it's a technological disruption, there will always be changes. It's not just things like that. It's also people's mindsets shifting. And I think if you're taking something like the Great Resignation, I think that the entire mindset shift, the mentality, those are other areas where that also comes into play. So things like pay, policy, and procedure are not things that we can stick to and say, okay, we have these things in place. Why isn't it working? Why are people still leaving? Why are people dissatisfied? Why are productivity levels dropping? And the reason for that is because the core of it, the people factor, is entirely lost. So taking into consideration things like, okay, now if we're going to talk about the Great Resignation, it's on two ends of the spectrum, right? I've been doing a lot of reading, and on one end of it, you find that there is hardcore data which says, okay, yes, this is a very real problem in areas of Eastern Asia, in the US, in Europe. There's a mass exodus of people who are leaving. And if we're going to bring in the whole millennial and Gen Z thing, it is driven by that particular segment. But on the other end of the spectrum, I mean, if we were to look at, and this is just maybe a bit of a micro view, but if I was to look at my organization, we actually saw some of the biggest growth during COVID. We were able to do a lot of building. We were able to bring a lot of people in during that period of time. And I think that actually comes into play is maybe the fact that we have a culture which is actually people first. So although we are a 100+ company, we still have that kind of startup mentality. We still have that mentality where it's not just an employee, it's not just a name on a paper. We're actually focused on that employee's experience. That's where I think, empathy and emotional intelligence comes into play in terms of talent acquisition and recruitment. Because it's not just about saying fancy words and bringing someone into your company. It's about creating a lifelong impression, making sure that that culture is there over the entire life cycle. So in terms of something like the Great Resignation, if we're going to talk about it, I think that you can't, it's a bit of a gray area. You can't really say, okay, it's just a buzzword. And you can't really say, oh, it's a real thing, because there are several, it depends on the company, it depends on the industry, it depends on several other things. I mean, for example, if you're going to take industry matter into place, if you look at the service, or rather, if you look into industries which require person-to-person interaction, for example, the hospitality industry, of course, that has taken a massive hit. I mean, if you look at as soon as COVID came into play, even before COVID, if you're looking at Sri Lanka and we're looking at the Easter attacks that happened, there must have been major problems there were definitely major problems in the country, especially when you look at the hospitality sector. And that creates kind of a mass panic, doesn't it, for people in those industries. If you're working in a hotel, or if you're working, I mean, mainly in hotels and, in restaurants where there is a need for person-to-person interaction, you're going to panic because people have bills to pay, they have families to feed, and that creates a lot of job insecurity. So it kind of goes without saying, if you're looking at a person's mindset, of course, that's going to create a big number of resignations, because they're going to want to look at getting into a different kind of career. And I think that there are several different factors actually that come into play when you look at things like resignation. For example, people are, despite the fact that, the world is going through a very tumultuous kind of stage, people are actually starting up their own businesses, because that seems to be the only sustainable thing at the moment, because you never know what's going to happen at the company that you're working with at sometimes. I mean, when COVID first struck, we saw companies like Nike and JCPenney going through very, very difficult times, and they actually had to lay off a lot of people. So if companies like that are going through issues, and as Peter was saying, even in Sri Lanka, other companies which made massive layoffs, then of course people are going to, feel very insecure. So they're going to start up their own, they're probably going to start up their own businesses. They're probably going to think about a complete change in their career. So it's a lot about the mindset shift, and I can probably go, on and on and on about people's mental well-being, job insecurity, levels of burnout and stress, which could be due to several different factors in the workplace. But let's not drag it on, because I'm pretty sure that there are other people also who have a lot of insights on this. But I'll be pretty glad to jump onto the mental and emotional aspects as well, maybe later. So maybe that's something that we can revisit a little further into our discussion today.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important topic to tie up on, Zara. And I think you raised some really valid points in terms of, the insecurity. And, we have a question from Shafraz, who asked, why do people resign in huge groups even without finding a new job, right? I think it pushes, I think this whole pandemic has pushed everyone, I think, in two aspects in terms of everyone's mental resilience. And we haven't had much, change in our lives. And I feel like this was one way people were seeking out that change, is just putting yourself out there and seeing what it is. And, when the domino effect starts, like more opportunities start getting created. And so I don't think anyone was really left without anything. If anything, lots of talent got recycled around a lot of companies within Sri Lanka. And I think something we don't factor in a lot is also the immigration of a lot of the young kids in Sri Lanka, which I think will have a massive, brain drain like in unparalleled proportions by the end of this year when the statistics do come out. And, I'm happy to hear from the panel about their thoughts on that, whether that is a serious, talent shortage that we will face in Sri Lanka, and how do we uplift, how do you fill in the gaps that's existing out there in the market with the resources we have already, and how do we keep a workforce motivated, right? So while we're on the topic, so Gaurav, one thing I'd really like to, ask you is, in terms of, you've been involved in a number of digital transformations, I'm pretty sure at a business level and at an HR level as well. Do you think during this period, it really kind of blurred the lines between workplace and home? And is a reality that people were able to balance it, right? Or is a reality that everybody struggled, and that was perhaps one of the reasons for the Great Resignation, perhaps, that people just wanted respite from this situation?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can, Gaurav.
Yeah, right,
loud and clear.
Right. So like Peter and Zara were also referring, there's a huge burnout which has happened because of all this work from home kind of things which have been happening. There was a survey done by Bloomberg quite some time back, which said that 45% of the people actually reported huge burnout because of work from home policies which were in place because of COVID. So of course, there's a huge problem with respect to what work from home brings for literally people from all cadres, and right from people who are having young kids to people who are well set in their lives. It's such a painful time to go through. People are so used to enjoying or working in relation with people, communicating with each other, in front of each other, meeting across the tiffin areas, lunch rooms, meeting rooms. So things become a little more depressing when you don't have all those things to do. And in such times, I think it's where the organization had to do a lot more to kind of continue to create a positive work environment in a digital media, right? So when everyone is online, how do you do that? How do you ensure that employees are still okay to and still motivated to work for the company? So I think some of the key things which we as our group companies had done was that we started setting the expectations early and quite often with the employees to say, what do we really expect from you when we work from home? And we started acknowledging the employees, each employee's unique circumstances. So, for example, a mother who has just given birth to a baby and then she's still working. What does it mean with her raising the child while still working for us? How do we keep her motivated? Do we understand that yes, there would be times in which she would not be able to take care of the task which we would want her to work, and which is exactly what we did, right? So understanding each employee's unique circumstances was very, very critical while keeping the people motivated to work for the company. Then we started becoming more organized and more flexible at the same time to say, there are things, of course, we expect you to work, but we are giving you the flexibility enough to ensure that there are deadlines, but that does not mean that deadline is now. It's not yesterday. You have time in the whole day to figure out when you can do the things. And then there would be regular touchbacks. Maybe you could schedule sometimes during the whole day to say, we'll catch up at around this time for 15 minutes and see how things are going. So more and more communication was increasingly becoming more important. But it was not about saying, I'm doing micromanagement. We absolutely told all our managers to say, it's important to check on the worker's progress, but does not mean you end up micromanaging and seeing what exactly you're doing, right? And then there are, of course, tons of tools which are available today, which literally start scanning the employees' screens, seeing what activities they're doing, recording, seeing whether they're being productive, not productive. And I can give you a whole list of all these tools. But the idea is that it's not important to do that kind of a thing for an organization vis-a-vis ensuring that we promote accountability with let's say a day-to-day end-to-end report of what employee has done. We take a kind of a shared calendar or a project management application to understand how the progress has been happening. We figure out the task and deadlines with respect to each task. So ensuring that such kind of things happen, which motivates the employee and not really makes him feel that something is not going right for work from home for him or her, right? And then we started emphasizing more and more of communication. We started often asking them that how should we formally check in with the employees, because each person would have a very different need. Some parents with the young kids might not be available in the morning at all because the online education is on. They need to be with them, so they can't really be with us at that time. And we understand that. We ensure that people understand that there could be multiple ways of communicating, and how would they kind of want to be with each other with respect to formal communication, whether it should be through WhatsApp or should it be through Zoom meetings, should it be through emails, calls, so on and so forth. So kind of setting the expectation right with respect to how managers and employees want to communicate with each other, how often they want to do it, what kind of frequency of the casual conversation they can have, what is the response delay expectation. So for example, I'm sending a mail at 10 p.m. in the night. Do I expect a response at that time? No, I mean, you need to have a clear end to the day as well, because one of the most difficult or most complicated problem was people didn't understand when the day is actually ending, because it starts anytime and does not end at all, right? I've faced this myself across multiple organizations, saying people are sending mails at 11 p.m. in the night or midnight and expecting a response first thing in the morning, even before employees are coming back for starting to work or logging back online. So I think it's important to understand that there has to be a set time, and of course there has to be a flexibility around that time, but that does not mean that you end up literally saying, you know, I want it now. You can't just go back to a person in person physically and say, please get it done right now. Give them some kind of a plan, give them a timeline to say, this is what we need to accomplish in this duration. And then from there, we take it forward, give them a little flexibility. And it's very, very important to listen to the employees, because, you know, in these times, it becomes very difficult to communicate, really show your emotions and empathy online. It does not happen the way it used to happen earlier, right? I can't show you my emotions. I can't show you what I'm feeling on a particular problem. I would always say it's perfectly okay. But that's not really the case. We all understand that every day we go through so many problems, right? So I think it's important to find a way to collaborate better. It's also very important to celebrate the success for the team. Because, you know, you can't celebrate the success the way we go for, let's say, team lunch and give a certificate and, you know, kind of show some ways of how this can be done and make people's morale better. But now ensuring that all these things happen online is also becoming very important, celebrating the success. And then there are tons of tools for figuring out how do you, you know, manage the team communication. For example, Slack and the workplace from Facebook are the few of the tools which are helping our groups across the companies to work together in a much social media friendly way. And then our tools related to project management, team meeting scheduling, video calling, etc., etc. So there's so many things which technology has enabled. But what I'm still suggesting is that technology, of course, not the way of reaching or ensuring that the productivity is on rise. It has to depend on, like Peter also said, it is a people issue, which has to be dealt and enabled by technology, rather than the other way around, where technology cannot take the onus of ensuring people's morals are high. It has to come from the organization's policies and the processes, which should be thinking about employees first, listen to them much more. And then if technology can enable that to happen, then it's a win-win situation for everyone.
Yeah, no, fantastic points, Gaurav. And I think, you know, a lot of what you raised, I mean, sounds like a fantastic organization you're working for, given that they're, you know, considering all these aspects. And I think what's been interesting for me in terms of observation, in terms of the pandemic and accessibility and connectivity, a lot of the organizations that, you know, didn't require people to come into the workplaces physically actually thrived in this situation. But traditionally, there were organizations, say, for example, banks, and this is where, Chiranti, I'd like to hear from you on that, right? Because of the way traditional infrastructure in banks are built, like your terminals, for example, you can't pick it up and take it home, right? And there are security implications attached to these elements as well. So, Chiranti, how did you make remote working happen in a banking environment, and what were some of the infrastructure challenges involved? And, you know, I mean, you've heard from Peter, Zara, and Gaurav, like, did you bring any of those elements in? Was it successful? Was it challenging? Was something I'd love to hear from you.
Okay, so good evening, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. Actually, to respond to your question, literally, we just unplugged some desktops and send them home, and some of them are still working with those desktops from home. But then to put it into perspective, banks are regulated for information, data, and cybersecurity. So there are Basel compliances, so it's a serious business. So we had to do it in a responsible manner. By April of 2020, we had got our work from home policy done with the relevant format for people requisitions, stay at home, what were the categories, criteria, and technology requisitions. So I think it was a huge effort between our HR teams, IT teams, and of course the leadership team. And which is why I believe the Asian Bank awarded HNB as the best COVID managed bank in Sri Lanka, and our CEO as the best CEO of the best COVID managed bank. And last night from Ceylon Chambers, Ceylon Chamber of Commerce Best Corporate Citizen, we won the award for the best COVID resilient corporate, because running a business with 252 branches and 5,000 staff across the island, and being suddenly overnight gazetted as an essential service. I mean, Triforces, yes, police, yes, healthcare, yes, we know they're essential services. probably the fire brigade, but bankers became essential. Our people are not vaccinated. We were expected to run our branches. And we were all faced with the same threat that everyone was faced with. So we had to do a lot of work together. We created a COVID shield team at the highest level, constituted with leadership, the whole leadership team, and then various tribes working in terms of health, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of tech, in terms of customer responsiveness, in terms of managing and monitoring the corporate communications, including social media feeds and our omni-channel contact center. And we enabled, thankfully, looking back, we didn't have any data breaches, and this is not a very comfortable area to be speaking about. We've had our fair share of heartaches and incidents in the past, and of course, yes. So it was a lot of team effort, a lot of hard work, a lot of sleepless nights for many of us, but we managed to pull it through to the highest levels of governance and compliance. Of course, it meant a lot of cost to be incurred as well. November 1st, after the fourth wave, we started recalling the troops back to office after 2 years. Of course, the top team, the SEAL suite, was entirely working right throughout from last May after the first lockdown on premise. So we've been coming to work, but we kept our teams in split teams, branches in split teams, our centralized credit, centralized operations, centralized collections, all in split teams, and the business continued to run. And this was also with the central bank's COVID Saubhagya moratorium program for business revival. So that was additional work processing the interest and capital moratorium applications. And that was beyond the day-to-day business support, that was being conducted, the revivals support. So obviously, there was a lot of pressure on all fronts. And I think it was a huge team effort from head to toe to tail. That's what I would like to say.
Yeah, absolutely, Sharanti. This is something I'd love to ask from the panel is, and this may be controversial, and Peter, because I think you work with a number of different organizations as well, you might have a very different insight. Do you think the HR teams really had to take on, a lot more of a burden in terms of pivoting, trying to figure out like which employees came in when, who stayed at home, and at the same time, lots of restructures and transformations were taking place. What was the impact on the HR personnel of this country, and did you see it being done well? Peter, I'll start with you. You're on mute, Peter.
One of the problems with the way HR is constructed across companies, we are following a very old archaic system of relying on HR to manage people. I mean, how absurd is that? I mean, why should there be one central organization to manage people? That should be given to the team leaders. In fact, there's a very interesting Fortune article, The Future of Work, Say Goodbye to HR. So the point is that's what the problem is. And as a result, HR becomes so bureaucratic, They take on a very high position on various matters, and it becomes a very bureaucratic organization. What they should do is HR, everyone practices HR, team leaders. That's where the newer companies have team leaders, very small teams of 5, 10, 8 people, and they are empowered to do all of the things that are done centrally by HR. Now, HR can manage payroll and all of that. That's an operational side on a mass scale, EPF, all that, but that's okay. But this people management and culture, which is the biggest role of HR, which I don't know many companies are whether they're actually doing that, they pay lip service to culture, but actually decentralize, make HR go away, in other words, so that the team leaders are the ones who are checking in. How are you doing? How are you faring? What are your strengths? Am I putting their strengths to work? Imagine, Minuri, 85% of the people are disengaged from work. That's a global statistic. Only 15% of the people are engaged in work, where they come to work to do something. 85% are disengaged. Global statistic. And we rely on one department to fix it. That's unfair by the HR department also. So my point is, how do we get people engaged? And 17% are actively disengaged. Actively disengaged. They're toxic. So, empower the teams, make the teams check in. That's where digital comes in, because they can check in themselves. They can put in their own, the way they're feeling, their work, all of that, because you're working in small teams. Now, just to see, I was looking at Surge Global. Most of you have heard of Surge Global. You're run by this very young guy called Banu. He had no background in running business or anything like that. You go to his website, there's a salary calculator. So you pick the position, it's publicly available. Salary calculator. You pick the position, and then you say what skill level. There's a way in which they measure your skill level that has not been updated. So you put the skill level, your salary, so you know what salary level. You don't have to go to HR department. And then you send in your application. Somebody will pick it up and say, come, join the team. That's the salary, done, start work. So I think it's unfair also by organizations to look at the HR heads and say, fix this problem. I mean, come on. And how empowered are they to go and really work with their teams to empower the teams at the very low level, the frontline staff and all that? It's impossible. I mean, Shiranti can't do that. She has thousands of employees every day. I'm sure she must have figured out a way, and we'd like to hear from her how they do it. But I think it's the wrong approach. I think HR needs to fundamentally change in the way we are structured, the way we work, the way we look at applications and all of that. That's another topic.
No, I agree with you 100%, Peter. I think I don't feel like I'm doing a disservice to my background in HR, but I 100% believe in you, because I think if you can get your hiring and your values right, that management part can then definitely be with the actual managers, right? Because they come to HR and they see us. I mean, you would have all seen the memes and the jokes about HR. They're the ones who always say no. They're the ones who say you can't do this more than you can do something, right?
And the managers pass
so
the
that's
buck.
what I think
the managers pass the buck.
Yeah.
The managers pass the buck. They'll
Exactly.
say, no, go talk to HR. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
And all that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
and I think, because I think as a result of that, I think HR has always just got this like bad name in terms of like the enforcers rather than the enablers. So absolutely, I 100% agree with you, Peter. I think, that transformation definitely needs to happen. Chiranti, Zara, Gaurav, any opinion with what was just shared there from you?
I think Shiranti here, just I'd like to agree with Peter. I mean, people management should be left with the teams. HR is only there to set the policy and have the governance framework of the systems. And I think that's exactly what happens even here. We have 10 regions, all the 252 branches are scattered across 10 regions. Our first level of leadership of people comes from the branch managers and then the regional managers. So basically, there's a lot of devolution in terms of day-to-day management that has gone down. Even nominating for training is done at that end. Here, it's only the policy administration, governance, and of course, culture. Interestingly, since I moved out of HR 3 years ago to head the transformation, digital transformation, tech, people and culture transformation all came out with me into the transformation management office. So Peter, there you are. There are Lankan organizations doing these things, and
very good, excellent.
I'm really happy because these are in a nice nucleus with different cross-functional teams working on these, like the service strategy, the product strategy, the digital strategy, the people strategy, and the culture strategy. So it's a lovely combination actually, and also bold steps, especially for local brands like us. And heritage brands like us. These are like unconventional and more bolded step to take. And we've taken those. And I think not just us, there's a lot of companies, newer and younger companies taking these steps into the future, which is looking very promising. So that's what I thought I'll add.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shiranti. Zara and Gaurav, anything you'd like to add?
Kind of agree with both Peter, Shiranti. So the thing is that a lot of things which HR had been doing earlier is something which can be enabled a lot with digital tools and means these days. So for example, if you talk about attendance capturing, now earlier it used to be very mundane archaic process. Now you can enable it using facial recognition or fingerprint, or a lot of ways of doing it. Similarly, the things like payroll. Now payroll is something which can be directly linked with, it could be linked with your attendance, it could be linked with your performance appraisals, it could be linked with criteria which can be enabled through digital means, where you would not really need HR to come in as such, unless you would need to set some policies and frameworks, which if it's set at a global level, at a central level once, then it could be kind of digitized in a way where you don't really need further interventions from HR after that. So I think only the areas which are important for HR, for the future from HR perspective, are where there are teething troubles with respect to employees' behavioral aspect, which cannot really be dealt directly with a technology solution, or something which is creating issues for the organization. For example, abuses or something related to trade unions or things around that, which cannot be dealt in a way where technology can support. I think in those areas, maybe the HR would have a much cleaner and better defined role rather than anything else in future. So I believe there's a combination of a proper tech-enabled organization and a good HR practice to allow only those functions and the areas which clearly define the aspects of where HR should intervene would really take the companies in the right direction.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gaurav. Zara?
Yeah, I mean, piggybacking off what Gaurav just said about, about the whole HR function, there are certain areas that are only going to be areas that they can handle. And definitely that is something that is going to continue for the foreseeable future. There was actually one point that Peter mentioned earlier that really stuck with me, which was the fact that it is unfair to expect HR to solve all these problems. Because especially when you look at things like engagement, it's not something that HR can handle entirely on their own. And I think that empowerment, trust, and transparency are three very important areas that we need to focus on here now. Because when you look at like engagement, it is not an HR problem. And I know that that can sound a little strange to say, but it is actually an organizational problem. If your staff are disengaged, then it's not something where you can go to HR and be like, come up with a solution for this. The reason is because of our mindset, right? We think, okay, HR people, these are the people who are going to come up with solutions for us. But actually, I mean, when you look at it very realistically and very rationally thinking, if you're looking at a really, really large organization, how many thousands of employees you have to deal with, or even hundreds for that matter? You have to think of the hierarchies, you have to think of what level these people are at, what departments they're at, what is their nature of work. For example, an employee who is in one particular job, which is a very labor-intensive job, might be disengaged in a different way to someone whose job involves a lot of thinking, a lot of creative power. And the only people who are going to be able to understand how exactly to solve that problem are the line managers or are the departmental heads, because they're the ones who know their staff. They're the ones who are familiar with the staff's work. They know them on somewhat of a personal basis. They know them in terms of their capacity. They know them in terms of their workloads. And they know them in terms of the way that they respond emotionally and mentally to work as well. And every single employee, or rather, I think rather than referring to people in an organization as employees, because that kind of puts them into a box as, hey, we are bringing you in for a particular reason. I think it kind of disconnects from the fact that these are other human beings. They're people as well. And they each have different approaches and different ways of dealing with things. So I think that when you think about something like engagement or getting organizations engaged, getting departments engaged, it's very integrated. And I think that was something that Shiranti also mentioned. You can't just leave it all up to one department. It needs to be several different departments. It needs to come straight from the top. Because I mean, when you take something like culture is not something that you can enforce. Culture is not something where you can say, we are going to be very happy. Policy, everyone be happy now. It's not going to work that way. It's something that trickles down from the top, and it's something that is almost like a seed that's planted as soon as the company is started, or when there's some kind of transformation that happens in the company. And that is something that you have to be very authentic about it. You can't fake it. Because one thing, and I think that this is actually a reason why, I mean, if you're going to tie into things like resignation or disengaged employees, It's because companies tend to say one thing and do something entirely different. If you are going to say that you are a people-first culture, or if you're going to say that you are a flexible culture, or that you lead with empathy, or that you understand people's very unique circumstances, then you need to walk the talk. You can't just say that in order to get people through the door or to maintain retention rates and then not follow through with it. And that is not entirely an HR problem. That is a problem that trickles down from the top of it. And taking it from an organizational perspective, I mean, it's not just the top management or the C-suite who are responsible for this. And it's not just HR either. It comes right down to the bottom and to the staff as well. Because a big part of engagement also kind of ties into self-management. And I think that that's an area that we've been seeing a lot with COVID, is that, you know, an area, if you're going to look at things like burnout, and if you're going to look at things like disengagement and demotivation, you have to really dig pretty deep to figure out why employees are feeling that way. And a big part of it is self-management. And I think it was Gaurav mentioned that you don't really know when the workday ends. And I think remote working and the work from home structure actually has a big part to play in that, because when you think of it, no company in their right mind is going to say, stay at your desk from morning to night. One is because it's borderline illegal, and two is because it's just very bad work practice and bad work ethic. But the reason why we end up staying sometimes and working for so long is because of our self-management, right? It's because we're at home, we're already in a familiar environment, and we have things to do, so we are going to stay in one place and get all those things done. And that boils down to the way that you approach work or your work ethic. And that is something, or when you think of it that way, and when you think of each unique individual employee having very different ways of approaching work, then that creates this whole engagement issue into something much bigger. To actually solve that is to pay a little bit more attention to certain aspects of stuff that you may not have thought of before.
Yeah.
Example, just to throw something in from an actual workplace scenario, when we were all working at home during the lockdown and everything, we did understand that, hey, there are going to be issues like this because, you know, people react differently. So we brought on board a counselor. And this is something that I mentioned at, you know, a different session as well. We brought on board a counselor and told our employees, hey, if you guys do have any kind of issue, and if it's something that you feel you need to handle, because I mean, if you could think, if you look at the mental health care in Sri Lanka, some people might not be able to afford it. Some people might not be able to find resources that easily. So we thought, let's provide that resource for you. And that's just one step that we took to make things a little bit easier for people. Because when you look at changing people's emotional or mental mindsets and the way that they approach things from that particular sphere of thinking, it makes things a little bit more difficult, but it's not impossible. There are ways around it, but it's not the traditional, conventional style of management and leadership that we are all used to. So I think that we need to start putting the people back into people management, if I was to summarize.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, what I'm loving about the panel is how just progressive everyone is in their thought process, you know, in terms of your organizations and how much you're driving that culture. And you have no idea how happy that makes me to, you know, hear that and the passion in everything that you share, because that's what we need, right? Radical change to make it happen. Because sometimes it's to what everybody spoke about. Sometimes it's just a tick box exercise or just to, you know, compliance thing, and it doesn't come from the heart, the culture that's really needed. And time has gone by really quickly, everyone, which is fantastic. But we do have questions from the audience as well. Kamal, I know you had your hand up for a while, but we'd love to hear from you if you do have a question. Yes, Kamal, you are on mute, just so you know for now. Perhaps, oh, there we go.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to know what are the how to change a really big organization, the culture. How do you start the change? Is it? I'm assuming it's from the top, but it's going to be very difficult in a large organization. So I just like to get some idea how to start that.
That's a big question, Kamal. I think it's one of those, holy grail questions that everyone's asking, but a very good question as well. Peter, I see you've unmuted your microphone, and Zara, next to you.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It starts at the top, but it's also, the leadership teams in organizations today must really go back and look at their purpose. They can't run. They have got mission and vision statements that are so meaningless. They're so disconnected with the reality of the world. I've gone to bank boardrooms and they put this and I'm thinking, what the hell have you written there? Do any of your employees really care about your mission statement? One day I took the mission statement and showed it to the CEO because he was arguing with me about something. I know these people from my union days. They were all union boys. Now they're MDs. And I say, follow your mission and then you will treat me better. So he laughed and, so the point is, are they really looking at really challenging the way the organizations are run? Are they showing leadership or are they just managing the organization? Leadership means to go back to the drawing board, to look at, and you're talking about Gen Z and all that's happening today. Is our old tried and tested systems valid today? How relevant are they? Now take the idea. There was actually some CEOs in banks. When they come, everybody is moved off the lift. The lift is reserved for the MD. I mean, you must be quite ridiculously self-important to do something as stupid as that. He goes alone in the lift.
But I think also with that, Peter, I think it's because nobody's challenged the system yet, right? Because somebody has done that for 30 years and nobody's questioned it.
But I'm saying the very notion that we do that. Anyway, I have to quickly move on. So then, then they're all sitting in their 10th, 15th floor, 20th floor, 100th floor, I don't know, in their cubicles. Staff doesn't see them. They are in their gilded cages and they're huge offices. I go there and sit. I feel intimidated, waiting to be called for a meeting with some MD or CEO of a bank. They're living in a world of their own. They don't come and walk around and mingle and talk and, that's a culture. So, and transparency. How transparent are you? Now, MAS and all don't declare their profits. Okay, that's their choice. But at Enable, we shared quarterly numbers, margins, profits, everything. And the times were bad. We said we're having bad times. We had a 960 million rupee problem. And we took it to the staff at a staff meeting and said, how can we all pull ourselves together to fix this? And then you also say, sorry, if you screwed up. Now, I shouted at some guy when I was CEO of Enable, young chap. 3 times I'd asked him to do something for someone else who was helping us. He hadn't done it. He was a young graduate. And one day I lost it. I shouted at him. And then there were other people who heard it. So I did apologize to him personally. I had at a town hall meeting, I said, you know what? I'm not unhappy about why I pulled him up, but I shouldn't have shouted at him like that. Publicly. That's a culture. And then you also hold yourself out of accountability. For example, I told myself that I'm going to be more timely about work. I was a little not so organized with my time. I said meetings must start on time, stop on time. I was not very good at that. I was not as bad as Chandrika Bandaranaike, but I was, quite bad. She was the president, lovely lady. So I said, you know what? I'm sharing this. I wrote a mail to the entire staff and said, I am trying to do this. So call me out when I'm not following my own standard I've set for myself. So call me out if meetings are going on. Peter, remember you wanted to change this? Call me out. That's a culture. So he's right. Sasidharan is right. It starts at the top. I don't even think organizations are so busy managing the present that they're really not thinking of creating the future for themselves and their. Even take digital transformation. How many young people are involved in the banks? I work with all the banks. Very archaic. All the senior management is holding on to the digital transformation. Nothing happens. And there are no young voices heard in these organizations. How many young people are heard in strategic planning at banks and big corporates? All ancient people. So their voices are not heard. So that's a culture. Who is going to change that? A new leader has to say, you know what? Let's change this. Otherwise, someone will disrupt you. But of course, they're making super profits, so they think that will take them into the future. One day they'll be disrupted.
Yep. And yeah, somebody did say, it's no longer starting from the top. Maybe it needs to start from the bottom in terms of change, which is very interesting insight. So Shriyanti, you've heard some interesting insights from Peter with regard to banks, and would you like to add, how maybe perhaps you're doing things a bit differently, or you challenge the system a bit?
So yeah, I mean, I was intently listening to some of the interesting insights shared by Peter. Rather than agree or disagree, let me share a few of my own personal experiences from where I come from. Our digital tribes, we have a war room, like it's filled with people who are like 21 to something, a lot of under 30s. And these guys are given access to use all the bank apps, all the telco apps, all, look at Erica's and Nina's from Swedbank and Bank of America and here and there, and look at global, bring it in. Look at what's happening in the market, bring it in. That's the kind of, and we have channels to listen to them. Of course, banks are typically very hierarchical organizations. So obviously, if any one of you come for a meeting, you're not going to meet some 24-year-old or a 21-year-old. You'll meet someone, a senior manager and above grade. And that's a standard norm, right? But then there are a lot of people working, and, they will get our competitor bank guys to come and do digital onboarding, see what the touch points are, how many touch points we will have, where the wet signatures are required, so many things. Now, of course, these digital signatures are thankfully accepted. We've been waiting for this to come. But that's just one experience. But yes, sometimes, culture eats strategy for breakfast, structure defeats vision and change. Yes, so there are limiting factors, especially in tall hierarchies. But I like to also share a very fundamental, we changed the operating model of our bank in 2.5 years ago with the transformation program. So we were very branch centric, booking business, underwriting business, appraising credit, disbursing credit, everything at a branch level. We completely flipped that model, centralized even the credit and all that. And that's a massive change across a bank with 252 touch points, north, south, east, of west, different customer profiles, different awareness, education levels. So in doing this, we created what we call BOM wizards, branch operating model wizards. So we created a team of about 50 guys who went and spent time with ground level customers, staff, educating and working with them. First, it was idea generation and capturing. We did a lot of surveys. So to answer Kamal's question, a bank's board strategy committee, the CEO and the C team will have the vision and the foresight and the technical competence to envision a future. And that's part of the job. But then you don't bring it from out and shove it down, right down to the last man on the ground. There's another process of, sourcing their ideas also. We have something called Idea Box and Spark. A lot of really great ideas come through that. And some of our digital war room, crowds and some of these other various think pods we have for various solutioning. Young people bring in a lot of ideas and we have converted them into solutions. We have Six Sigma yellow belts and all. Those are all ideas that have got converted. And that is the Future Leaders program. So all our management trainees, executive trainees, any wannabe, millennial kind of person, when we have lots of them here, they get that voice. And it's not like a tech startup company where the system is very easy, but yes, there is a system and a flow. So I can credibly say this because my teams are filled with young people. And there's a lot of learning that happens as a process. I learn every day and I become much younger every day working with a lot of these young people. And they're full of knowledge. I mean, they're full of talent and we need to harness that.
Thank you, Shriyanti. So just hearing out Peter and Shriyanti and what was really shared, one thing that really comes to mind, and back to Kamal's question, is how much of a safe environment do we create in our organizations to actually challenge your leadership, right? And back to Peter's point, you can have all the statements in the world, but what's your environment saying? So Zara and Gaurav, I'd love to hear from you. Like, how do you create a safe environment? And sometimes that may not come from the top, right? It may need a formidable push and force from, ERG groups, for example, in the organization that push this up. What are your thoughts?
So I'd like to take this because, something that Chiranti was saying was talking about, having a big team of millennial and Gen Zs. And, probably being one of those mentioned young people, in our organization, for example, we have a lot of young people, a lot of Gen Z and a lot of millennials working. So the way that I see it, and, the organization that I worked in before as well, was a very millennial and Gen Z driven workforce. So it's very noticeably a different kind of culture. So the thing is, when it comes to things like this, and when you bring in new ideas and new ways of working, yes, the newer generations can bring that. The key factor here is, and I think that one of our audience members also made a point, it does not start from the top anymore, it starts from the bottom. And definitely, if you're referring to these kinds of workforces, Gen Zs and millennials, yes, they can bring the ideas in, but talking about a safe environment, we could be having, and I say we because I fall into the category, we could be having all the ideas in the world, all the innovations and the solutions and all of that. But we need to have that fluidity, and that flexibility needs to be there, because if the higher ups are very rigid, then none of that is going to go through. Because I think that comes from, it could be the fact that, sometimes there might be people who are intimidated and do not want to bring in new ideas into a company. They could be intimidated not just by the fact that, this is a younger person, but they could also be intimidated by the fact that this idea might not work. And if I allow it to happen, it's going to reflect badly on me. And I think that that is also a bit of a dangerous mentality that people have to start coming out of, because there is no growth within a comfort zone. There's no growth sticking to the exact same procedures that you've been sticking to for a long time. And, as Peter was saying, a lot of companies, just because they make the profits, they think, okay, you know what, we are fine, let's stick to what we're doing right now. But that's not going to be sustainable, and it's not going to take a company that's successful now 10 to 20 years into the future. Because if you look at any company that's been around for, let's say, 100 odd years, they've changed their procedures and their approaches over several different things. And I just saw another comment actually from Shafraz, to better manage and handle millennials, would become one of them too. And I agree. I think that, what Chiranti also said, working with a lot of young people, she feels younger too. It's a fresh mindset. And I think that it's not just about, hey, let's take a bunch of millennials and a bunch of Gen Zs and put them into an organization and expect success. It needs to kind of be a symbiotic relationship, because both parties, if you're going to take the people who have more traditional values and more traditional ideas, and if you take people who have unconventional ideas, there needs to be something where it works together. You can't just go hell for leather with all sorts of crazy ideas and, throw things at the wall and expect it to stick, because not all of it is going to. You need the wild sparks, but you also need the experience to kind of rein it in, to be like, hey, this idea works, but let's do it this way. And that's an important part. So I think that when you take safe environments and when you take, bringing those new ideas into the picture, it's a case of knowing how to manage it in a way where it's going to be efficient and effective for both parties. So it's not completely relinquishing control and just saying, hey, go crazy. And it's not about being very strict and rigid and autocratic either. It's about there has to be a middle ground. There has to be kind of a best of both worlds sort of scenario. And I think that that is actually where the most amount of growth will be seen. Because like I said, you need the wild sparks, but you also need a little bit of that knowledge, that industry experience, that very realistic thinking, and, the trial and error to rein that in and be like, hey, this is how we're going to do it. So I think that to sum off, I think that definitely organizations need to be less rigid. They need to have more of an open culture where it's not going to be this bureaucratic thing. When Peter was talking about how, and I remember people when I was much younger, people tell me about this culture in some organizations where, the big man is treated like a god. And that's not something that any Gen Z or any millennial is going to, not going to be cool with. That's not going to happen. So there needs to be a bit of humility brought into the workplace, a little less of that self-importance, a little bit more of where you come down to the level of everybody else, because then you have a better understanding of the staff and you are more approachable. So people feel more comfortable coming with you because you never know where the ideas are going to come from, right? I mean, like Shiranti was saying about, the idea box, I believe what she called it, is that, you get a lot of these undergrads or these management trainees who come up with crazy good ideas. So you never know where it's going to come from. It could be an intern who has an amazing idea that could lead you to success. But if you're going to distance yourself and kind of give yourself this aura of unapproachability, nobody's going to come to you with that idea. So you need to be approachable. You need to create that very safe environment. You need to be a little less rigid and relax things a little bit so that people feel more comfortable with their communication. And in a big way, that does tie into overall retention as well.
Yeah, definitely hear you out there, Zara. And I think, back to Kamal's question, and I think, it has to come from the top. I don't think I've ever been in an organization where the CEO didn't walk the talk. And even I think there was like a push from the ERGs and everyone else. If there's not that level of safety enabling that organization, especially at top level, it's just going to be words and things done for the sake of it, right? And that's not what, yeah.
Sorry, but it becomes a lot of frustration.
Absolutely.
When there's a very rigid top management, and then there's this, this very vibrant, very fluid, very flexible group of people who are trying to make a change, because there is this conception, yes, millennials and Gen Zs, they want to see change where they're working. They want to be a part of something bigger. And to be very realistic, I know that our conversation has, we've been throwing these words around, millennial and Gen Z, around a lot, but to be very realistic, that is the future workforce. That those are the generations that are going to be coming into the workforce a lot more heavily now. So there is going to be a workplace shift. There are going to be changes, and there will be a lot of frustration if the CEO, if the people at the top do not walk the talk, because there's going to be a clash. There's going to be conflict, because there's going to be people who are like, I have ideas and I think it's going to work, and they're just being hit back with no, and that's not going to lead anyone anywhere. It's going to be a lot of satisfaction and ultimately disgruntled employees who leave the company. So
just want to give a few cents here. What we have done in our organizations is that we have created a team of young people who have come out fresh from, let's say, the colleges, who do not have a lot of industry experience. But what we've done with them is that we ask them to do the industry research across all the world companies in the industries which you want to focus on. We ask them to see what they have done differently to grow at a phenomenal pace. So they pick out top 3, top 5 companies, see what all kind of initiatives those have taken in terms of leading them to grow at a pace which is unheard of in that industry. And then we see if there is a way of aligning that to the verticals where we are present in. And then we bring in a few of the young adults from that company's experience perspective, saying who would have spent, let's say, 2 or 3 years in the company, understands the basic nuances of the company, to kind of vet the idea, saying that yes, might make sense, might not make sense. Who's also in the similar league with respect to, let's say, the age, if you would call it that way. Once that process is vetted to say it kind of aligns with the direction which could have taken, then we bring in a very senior person who also is of a similar mindset to say, I will not say no to anything and everything. Let's hear you out. And if there is a way which makes sense for us to go forward, then we present it to the leadership of the company, saying these ideas look brilliant. These ideas have worked across multiple organizations in the similar league across the world. And if they have worked in some other part of the world, why not we try it here? I mean, of course, there are ways of why we say things which work in, let's say, UK might not work in Sri Lanka, but in more often than not, issues are similar across in the world, in the similar organization. We might be 5 or 10 years behind, but if we know what these best of the companies have done now, why can't we take that learning now and probably bridge the gap of 5 to 10 years, right? So I think that's the way we have approached these problems across multiple organizations. So for example, when I came in Sri Lanka 3 years back, we were not doing much on, let's say, data sciences, artificial intelligence level. We were very, very, kind of primitive in a lot of areas. Now, what we saw was that there's a huge opportunity which all the industries across the world are doing, which we have not even started doing. And then we try to bridge the gap by bringing in the best of the companies who have done it in the similar industry there. presented those ideas to the leadership saying, these worked in this industry, and can we take it up? And then what worked was the leadership was sold on the idea saying, yes, let's do it. What is the worst? We would lose the money, which we would kind of try it out in terms of the ideas. But what if it works? And if something has worked in the similar industry in, let's say, India, or let's say in Bangladesh, or in Pakistan, or in Malaysia, we are in that kind of a region where things are very similar, right? If the problem is related to all the areas which we are talking about in the similar industry, in the similar geography, it would definitely be solvable and workable in Sri Lanka as well. And then we can bridge the gap quicker, so, right? So in that way, the ideas are not just ideas, they are ideas which are already proven, and they do not need to be vetted again in the sense that, oh, I need to push it a lot to have it started in Sri Lanka. If it has worked elsewhere, it will potentially be working here as well. Maybe few things might not, but then more often than not, the ideas would be well proven. So in that way, I think things become easy, and then ideas don't get rejected. So like, how do we create a safe environment? I think it's about, if the ideas are brought in, which are provable, already worked for other industries in the world, they are much safer to be projected. And when you give an idea backed by sufficient evidences, then nobody can just outright reject it, right?
Yeah.
So if I tell that Amazon has done it, or Google has done it, or one of the best of the companies have done it, then why not us? Why can't we bring them in Sri Lanka and do it?
Give it a try. Yeah, exactly, Gaurav. No, I mean, I love the fire that everybody's bringing into this discussion in terms of, and I hear it out, right? And something you always say with change management is sometimes an organization needs to reach 7 times in order for it to kind of register and go with the flow of the change. So I think, persistence is key when it comes to change. But I think no matter how value driven in terms of a hierarchy, the bottom section of the talent pool is, if your top is not aligned, like, you really have to question, are you even the right fit for this organization, right? And make the choice that's right for you in terms of your values and ethos. And it's very, very hard. And I think, this is a conversation I think we can have for 2 hours or more, everyone, but we're actually 12 minutes over. And I'm sure we can connect in a different platform and definitely continue this conversation. But thank you all ever so much to Peter, Chiranthi, Zara, and Gaurav for your honest and authentic reflections and sharing your experiences with us on the digital transformation side. And I think it took a great segue into the generational segmentation. Is that realistic? Is that needed? And from the employee wellness engagement side, and absolutely loved it. So thank you all very much for joining, and for audience as well, and to SIXER Video for organizing this session for all of us. Thank you all very much, and have a lovely day.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Fantastic. Thank you.